Former President Trump suggested the federal government was not only sending FEMA aid meant for the hurricane to migrants, but going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. Said they're going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. There is no truth to that. You refuse to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. So I'm just going to assume that if I ask you 50 times whether he lost the election, you would not acknowledge that he did.
Wow. What a night and day difference indeed. Just like the last time I recorded this video, where I had some hair, compared to now with my newly balded head. Feels quite nice, by the way. Sorry, I'm being a little selfish on that regard, but there's a bit of correlation to that, alright? Stay with me now. So you all remember when Bill Whitaker did that 60-minute interview with Kamala Harris, right? And almost every single question she could not answer, and the very few that she did answer offered some horrible solutions, such as her quote-unquote bill for immigration. Well, recently, J.D. Vance was basically interviewed by this journalist from ABC News named Martha Raddatz. And the way he deals with this journalist and answers these questions compared to Kamala Harris is such a night and day difference, it's not even funny. And while we can't see the dislike ratio here, we can tell that there is up to 170,000 views and only 2.4 thousand likes, compared to 6.8 thousand comments. And going off of that information alone, it's safe to say that this lady got ratioed into oblivion. We're going to see exactly why this lady is getting absolutely blasted in the comments of this video, but before we start, make sure you subscribe, hit the thumbs up button and the notification bell down below, and share this with your friends all over the place to help us in exposing the Democrat Party even more. That being said, let's take a look at this sham of an interview.
Former President Trump suggested the federal government was not only sending FEMA aid meant for the hurricane to migrants, but going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. Do you think that is true?
I do.
Well, Martha, what the president said is that fundamentally FEMA aid is distracted by going to illegal migrants. And by the way, good morning, and thanks for having me. We've got Republican congressmen who are on the ground who represent that area saying that they have to call the White House to get food and water to FEMA. I don't frankly think there's anything malicious going on here, Martha, but I do think that we've had an incompetent response to this particular crisis, particularly in Western North Carolina, which, to be fair, was hit harder than a lot of us expected it. But fundamentally, if you've got 6 days after the hurricane, the 82nd Airborne is still trickling in, I do think that we had a fundamentally incompetent, overly bureaucratic response to the hurricane. So what you hear from folks on the ground is they feel left behind. And Martha, we have to remember, of course, I know this area well. This is the Appalachian region of our country where people have felt ignored by their government for 30 years, and it doesn't help when you have a response to the hurricane that's slow, that's halting, and then you layer on top of it,
Senator Vance
has done a lot.
Senator Vance, I want to go back to
resettlement work. Go ahead.
I want to go back.
Not to mention the photo op.
President Trump said. He said they're going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. There is no truth to that. And on staging, Pentagon officials say that active duty troops were staged and ready to go before being called upon and were instantly out the door. So President Trump, former President Trump, is saying things that aren't true about that money being withheld from Republican areas.
Well, Martha, I think you're actually confusing staging of resources from the rapid response of the U.S. military. I mean, look, in FEMA's defense, there are things after this hurricane that FEMA simply could not do. You actually need military command and control. You need military resources deployed to the area. And I think all the president has said is, frankly, what some of Kamala Harris's surrogates have said, which is that if these areas were a little bit more democratic, maybe Kamala Harris would have focused on them more. That acknowledgement is not to attack, frankly, the good folks of FEMA. It's to suggest that Americans are feeling left behind by their government, which they are, Martha.
Okay, I will say this real quick. J.D. Vance, I don't know if you can tell, but it's absolutely true that the government doesn't care about us. I would also like to mention that there are other groups and people out there who are doing a significantly better job combined than FEMA has ever done so far throughout this whole disaster that happened. Namely, people like Tim Kennedy and other helicopter pilots. Not to mention people getting rejected by FEMA for that measly $750. You know, we talked about all this before, alright? Let's just continue with this and see what else that Martha has to say.
More than
Senator
I am
Vance,
the fact that Donald
Senator
Trump
Vance, I'm just going to say that local
is wrong.
officials and FEMA officials say that is just flat wrong. But I want to, we played some other comments about migrants, including in Aurora, in Colorado, where Trump said the city had been invaded and conquered by Venezuelan gangs. The Republican mayor of the city said flatly the city and state have not been taken over or invaded or occupied by migrant gangs. So do you support Donald Trump making those claims that the Republican mayor says were grossly exaggerated and have hurt the city's identity and sense of safety? I understand what you're saying, that some people left behind, but he's making these statements that the mayor is flat out disputing.
They were invaded for
Well,
sure.
Martha, you just said the mayor said they were exaggerated.
Grossly exaggerated.
That means there's got to be some element of truth here. And of course, President Trump was actually in Aurora, Colorado, talking to people on the ground. And what we're hearing, of course, Martha, is that people are terrified by what has happened with some of these Venezuelan gangs.
Senator Vance, I'm going to stop you because I know exactly what happened.
Martha.
I'm going to stop you. The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again.
As far as the did not invade part, no, they definitely invaded that city. I don't know about take over, but they definitely invaded.
Why do you consider that the most important spot, the second most important spot?
Well, one reason, Martha, is just public opinion. And what I mean here is that we really want the American people to believe that we have a fair and equitable administration of justice. If not, the entire sort of system falls apart. You need people to believe that if the Attorney General prosecutes somebody, it's motivated by justice and law and not by politics. And unfortunately,
would Donald Trump go after his political opponents? Would Donald Trump go after his political opponents?
He never did.
Suggested that in the past.
Martha, he was president for 4 years, and he didn't go after his political opponents. You know who did go after her political opponents? Kamala Harris, who has tried to arrest everything from pro-life activists to her political opponents.
He said those people who cheated will be prosecuted
as a weapon against people.
I freaking love this guy. Just wanted to say that.
Election laws will be prosecuted. I think that's the administration of law. He didn't say people are going to go to jail because they disagree with me. That has in fact been the administration and the policy of Kamala Harris. Martha, look, under the last 3.5 years, we have seen politically motivated after politically motivated prosecution. I'd like us to just get back to a system of law and order where we try to arrest people when they break the law, not because they disagree with the prevailing opinion of the day. And there's a fundamental difference here between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Donald Trump may agree or disagree on a particular issue, but he will fight for your right to speak your mind without the government trying to silence you. Kamala Harris is explicitly
Senator Vance,
censorship.
I want to go back to Donald Trump.
We've got to get a Department of Justice that believes in the First Amendment, Martha. The First Amendment is the bedrock of our Constitution.
Senator,
we have Kamala Harris who doesn't
Senator, we're just about out of time here. We're just about out of time here. And I want to end with this. In interview after interview, question after question, and in the debate, you refuse to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. So I'm just going to assume that if I ask you 50 times whether he lost the election, you would not acknowledge that he did. Is that correct?
Martha, you asked this question. I've been asked this question 10 times in the past couple of weeks. Of course, Donald Trump and I believe there were problems in 2020. You haven't asked about inflation.
No, I'm sorry. Let's stick to this.
People,
I know.
American people want us to talk about how to make their lives better. They don't want us to.
Why won't you say that?
Because, Martha, I believe that in 2020, when big tech firms were censoring American citizens, that created very serious problems. And by the way, Martha, you're a journalist. You represent the American media. Look at the polling on this. A lot of Americans feel like they were silenced in the run-up to the 2020 election. That is such a bigger issue. That fundamental problem than me and Donald Trump talking about it. And unfortunately,
Martha, I don't understand why you won't just say it if you believe it.
Won't just say what? That I think the 2020 election had some problems? I've said that repeatedly.
Did Donald Trump lose? That's the question.
It more than had problems. Had more than problems.
Martha, I've said repeatedly, I think the 2020 election had problems. You want to say rigged? You want to say he won? Use whatever vocabulary term you want. I want to focus on the fact that we had big technology firms censoring our fellow citizens in a way that violated our fundamental rights. The fact that you're so obsessed with what you
Facebook, for example, just wanted to say that.
Rather than the phenomenon itself, suggests something very broken in the American media. If we want to restore trust in American elections and democracy, which I want to do, Martha, we have to talk openly about what happened in 2020. And most importantly, we've got to talk about what happened afterwards. Okay. Americans being unable to afford the basic necessities of middle-class life because Kamala Harris is in the White House.
We're going to leave it right there. Appreciate your time this morning.
Oh, she was just seething at the end there. She didn't want to keep it going on any longer. She probably would have blown a gasket. But if I'm being honest here, I think blowing a gasket might have done her some good. So, yeah. Another channel on YouTube that highlighted this interview stated that the whole purpose of a journalist is to uncover the truth no matter the consequences. And yet we got this lady trying to say that everything that Trump said is a flat-out lie, even though there are so many things proving him correct. You know, such as the fact that over $1 billion within the past couple of years have been given to immigrants, and the fact that Aurora, Colorado is being invaded by Venezuelan gang members. And yes, I wholeheartedly mean the word invaded. And this lady tries to claim that only a handful of these incidents with hotels and places being taken over are happening in Aurora, Colorado, or in Colorado in general. A handful? Even one is bad enough. A handful to her is no big deal compared to what Donald Trump may or may not have said about it. This is just so typical of journalists nowadays. They will blame literally everything on Trump and not on the border czar Kamala Harris, who allowed these gang members and terrorists to come in the first place. She is the vice president after all, and Joe Biden gave her authority over the southern border. Combine this with so many other things that were noticed throughout this interview, and you can tell that Martha Raddatz is not a real journalist. She's nothing more than a Democrat puppet, and that's all she'll ever be known for. Unless she repents for this and changes her ways. I most certainly pray that she does, but what do all of you think about this? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And make sure you subscribe, hit the thumbs up button and the notification bell as well, to let you know when we upload new videos and help us expose the Democrat Party even more, along with their hypocrisy and their lies. All that being said, CSO family, make sure to keep observing from a common sense perspective.